So two of my former bosses teamed up again last night for a fundraiser in California. And while President Biden was speaking with former President Obama, he offered a pretty stark reminder of what's at stake in November, especially when it comes to the Supreme Court. This is exclusive video we just obtained from the Biden campaign. Take a listen.
The next president is likely to have two new Supreme Court nominees. Two more. He's already appointed two that have been very negative in terms of the rights of individuals. The Supreme Court has never been as out of kilter as it is today. I mean, never. I taught constitutional law for 9 years. This guy knows more about it than most. Look, the fact of the matter is that this has never been a court that's been this far out of step.
Some pretty strong words there from President Biden, somebody who usually has historically spoken in defense of the Supreme Court. Joining me now is Congressman Jamie Raskin. He's the ranking member of the House Oversight Committee, and not to mention was also a constitutional law professor. What an expertise that has come in handy in the days we're living in, Congressman. It's great to see you. I just wanted to start with what we heard there. And, you know, a lot of people have been saying this, but the president has not been as critical at every moment at the Supreme Court. He has been more of late, but he basically said it's never been more out of kilter than it is today. I mean, do you agree with that?
Well, it's just operating like an arm of the Republican Party, which is now completely under the thumb of Donald Trump. And so if Trump thinks it's politically advantageous to make an alliance with the National Rifle Association, the Supreme Court's going to do it. We saw it in the bump stock opinion. Which basically overthrew the wisdom of the ATF, the executive branch of government, even when Trump was there and president, and said, oh, no, a bump stock added to a semi-automatic weapon cannot be treated as a machine gun because that's the NRA line. Now, we're going to go back and try to make this happen legislatively. That Vegas massacre took the lives of 58 people. There are 500 people wounded and still suffering from that day. I can't imagine what it's like for them to be watching this on TV with the Supreme Court making a mockery out of that experience. It's
so hard to watch these decisions, and then you pair that with kind of the ethical lapses, is a very diplomatic way of saying it. I mean, we're learning more and more about Clarence Thomas and what he hasn't disclosed. We have a range of different flags that are similar to what the insurrectionists were flying, that Alito has been flying outside of his home. You know, one of the questions, and you've spoken to this a bit before, but I wanted to raise it with you because you can help explain to people what is possible here, is why can't these justices be hauled before the Senate? I mean, they could be subpoenaed. You've made the point, just for everybody to understand, that would require 60 votes in the Senate for the subpoena to be enforced. What else could be done that isn't being done?
Well, they could be brought over to the Senate with a Democratic majority, except they would need 60 votes in order to enforce the subpoena. The real problem is that there's no binding ethics code on the Supreme Court. So the highest court in the land has the lowest ethical standards. They're the only judges in America that don't have a binding ethics code applied to them. So, you know, we're working on a lot of legislation that we hope we'll be able to get through in the next Congress that would establish an inspector general over in the Supreme Court, which would probably clean things up rather quickly, create a binding ethics code. But the thing that I'm doing with Ocasio-Cortez this coming week, and we've got some interesting Senate, cross-filers with us, is to say that the $50 gift ban that all members of Congress live under, and we basically just don't take gifts from lobbyists and people who want to influence, should apply to the Supreme Court. The idea that Clarence Thomas got millions of dollars of gifts as opposed to payments or bribes from a friend, sending him all over the world on travel. I mean, that's just
doesn't
absurd.
Pass the smell test.
No.
So is there anything, I mean, obviously a Democratic majority could then, a 60-vote majority could enforce it. Is there anything you wish the Senate was doing now, given how outspoken you've been? Around these justices?
I tell you, one thing that's very much on my mind is the leak of the Dobbs opinion, which, of course, destroyed Roe versus Wade. And when it was first leaked, we heard a lot from Chief Justice Roberts and Jim Jordan and the right wing about how they were going to get to the bottom of this, and it's never happened before. And I agreed with that. I mean, that's an unprecedented breach of Supreme Court protocol and procedure. They did a huge investigation, and then suddenly they went radio silent. And we've learned a lot more about Justice Alito and Justice Thomas and how immersed they are and their families are in right-wing politics. And I just wonder why somebody just blew the whistle on that investigation. I never thought it was going to be Elena Kagan or Justice Sotomayor. No, it wouldn't be that, but it very well could be Justices Alito and Thomas. And we haven't heard anything from anybody, and we don't know. You know, the Politico reporters who got the leak obviously know.
Yeah, I mean, and it's interesting. You think it could have been one of the conservatives. I know other people think that. So I wanted to ask you just about another report in Politico. Shortly after Trump was found guilty on 34 felony counts, he apparently picked up the phone to call Speaker Mike Johnson and said, "We have to overturn this." According to this story, Johnson then, according to one person familiar with the conversation, Johnson then, a former attorney himself, of course, conveyed he already believed the House had a role to play in addressing Trump's predicament. The two have since spoken multiple times. So I guess my question for you, knowing the House as you do, is what do you expect? Do you expect Mike Johnson, to try to do something here to overturn? I don't even know what that would be, but what would it be? And are you worried about that?
Speaker Johnson at that time also invoked his personal relationship with a number of Supreme Court justices and underscored the importance of the Supreme Court superintending the case and reviewing what had happened in New York. But I think in terms of the House itself, what we're likely to see is them subpoenaing prosecutors from the state and local level, like in New York or in Georgia, in order to intimidate them and harass them, which is what they've done before. It's an absolute assault on federalism and the independence of the states, which they pretend to support. But of course, they don't when it comes to their overriding commanding imperative, which is just to support whatever Donald Trump wants at any point. I mean, it's an amazing thing when you think about it, that you have a guy who's poised to be a major party presidential nominee, and he doesn't call the Speaker of the House to deal with the problem of healthcare costs or infrastructure in the country.
Or the border in a proactive way.
Nothing he even claims to be interested in. It's all about his legal docket. And it's been like this for most of his adult life. He's had more than 3,000 cases. You know, I was up in Jersey recently campaigning for some friends like Mikey Sherrill and Billy Pasquarello, and I can't tell you the number of people I met who said, "Oh, yeah, Donald Trump and his businesses still owe my family tens of thousands of dollars. We were electricians or plumbers or small business people who did work with them in Atlantic City, but Donald Trump made it a habit not to pay the small businesses and the working class people who helped to outfit his various casinos that ended up going bankrupt."
It tells